never have just settled to live an ordinary life. Even though what I'm trying to live now is right, like just living on the land and farming. That's as ordinary as it gets, right? Although it's now extraordinary. But it's about, for me, it's been about bringing the two things together. So I was trying to escape. That's the bottom line with my occult pursuits. I was trying to escape something, thinking that I was going towards something, and what I was trying to escape in part was just mundane, ordinary pleasures of life, because I couldn't really connect to them. So it's been a stripping down process, but I still do have a romance with knowledge and ideas and imagery, and it's not like I've become a Luddite or an anti-creative or anything like that. It's just there are certain ideologies running through, I would say, occultism and New Ageism and a lot of spirituality that are toxic, and that the evidence is in, I would say, that we live in a toxic and destructive culture. And so I don't think there's really many or even any major products of that culture that aren't carrying the seed of that toxicity, and that's what I've had to learn and recognize, I think, is that most of the stuff that gets sold to us or passed down to us is a Trojan horse for empire, if you will, or for some dark metaphysical forces.
So this toxic, this toxicity you described, do you believe this is by design or by human nature?
Well, more design than human nature, but I do think, as I said at the start, that we've been engineered. So you've got something called human nature, and then you've got something called the human condition, and those things are very, very different. And I don't think we know much about human nature, to be honest. Funny, because as I'm talking, I'm looking at my old website, Horticulture, and the last podcast is about Ted Bundy. So I'm looking at a picture of Ted Bundy, and he's an example of the human condition, right, at its worst, and of somebody who's just so cut off from his nature, from human nature. But to some extent, we've all been cut off from it, and I would say that's been engineered. So, but then if people are traumatized and colonized and conditioned into kind of malevolent or self-destructive behaviors, then they engineer themselves. Like, we become our own engineers in that regard. So it's so far back in terms of identifying the problem, the toxicity. One has to go back to the Garden of Eden. Regardless of how one sees that story, how literally one takes it, one has to go that far back, I feel, because it's like our nature got hijacked right at the beginning.
In one of your books, Homo sapiens, A Secret History of DNA from Eden to Armageddon. What is that?
That's one of the ones I said, I think I said it off the record, that I'm ashamed of. Maybe I did say it on the record.
Really?
That was in my Aeolus Cathus period, and that's the name I used. And that was my sorcerer's name, because traditional for sorcerers and magicians, you create a magical name. And it was an attempt to, as it says, well, it's in the subtitle, it was an attempt to sum up like the whole of human spiritual evolution in a single book. So it was kind of a hubris. There's some elements in there that I still think are sound, but now I see it more. I have actually tried to withdraw that book because I just don't think it's going to be good for anyone to read it. But I do think it's somewhat valuable as an example of what I was talking about, of how much my consciousness was polluted by these ideas I'd got from other systems books, false teachers, because it's very disconnected. Like, I'm trying to describe reality, referring to these purely archetypal, purely conceptual ideas, images, models. It's not at all grounded in anything real. So that's what I mean. That is an example of what happens, I think, when we get too pulled into any kind of ideology, but occultism is particularly about transcending the body and transcending physicality, and therefore I would say disassociating from reality.
What about your interest in Carlos Castaneda's? Has that changed?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I haven't completely thrown out the Castaneda baby, I mean, because I do think that those books, to some degree, I think they've been unfairly maligned, because I think there's absolutely some truth, profound knowledge in them. But the fact that Carlos Castaneda, if we believe Amy Wallace's account, Sorcerer's Apprentice, and it does seem credible, the fact that he went stark raving bonkers by the end and was a malevolent cult leader, that has to throw into question the whole system of knowledge that he was, communicating to the world. If it drove him mad, it's probably not very healthy, right? It doesn't mean it's not true. It just means so there's something, yeah.
We're all a bit mad.
Well, yeah, but he was abusively mad.
Well, yeah, that's interesting, because you're a fan of the film, and a student of film. Are you familiar with the movie Manhattan with Meryl Hemingway?
Yeah, of course.
And you realize that she had a relationship with Carlos Castaneda, the model who that movie was patterned after.
Oh, I didn't know that. Was it Mariel or Margot, the oldest?
Oh, no. The actual girl.
The actual girl that Woody Allen had sex with. Oh,
yes.
No, I've never heard that before.
She had a relationship with Woody Allen. She worked for Jeffrey Epstein. And she had a relationship with Carlos Castaneda. And there was one other, too. I think it might have been Robert Evans. I don't want to quote that specifically, but I've spoken to the woman. So.
Well, that's a very interesting piece of information. Thank you.
Yeah, and she feels that she was not taken advantage of. She thinks that this was beneficial to her life, this whole, all these experiences. Which leads to a question for you, for Jason Horsley. When you look back at your life, living this romantic life of searching, adventures, exploration, do you regret that, or would you rather have lived a simple life, or do you appreciate this romantic life?
It's a bit of both,
yeah.
Ed. I definitely regret the psychedelics, because I think it's empirical. I think it's undeniable that they did a lot of harm to my body, my energy system, and I'm still recovering from it. So my sense is, if I had at least avoided any of the toxins, and not just psychedelics, but worse stuff like cocaine, not much, but still tobacco, alcohol, marijuana. Like, I just did a shitload of stuff, although probably relative to many people not that bad. But anyway, I feel pretty confident that if I had managed to avoid any of that stuff, I would be a lot closer to, let's say, enlightenment, just to keep it simple, to wholeness, than I am. So if I had to throw out all the rest in order to not have done that, I probably would. But at the same time, of course, it's almost impossible not to, and it would be self-defeating, I think, to not appreciate that. When I look back over my life, I do think, wow, there's more stories to tell there than 6 lives, 6 average lives, or 10 or something. Not that I spend lots of time telling stories, but just to have that kind of, I'm not likely to have the regret that I didn't do enough, when I had to check out, at least.
I hear you. Ran with the Bulls in Pamplona, right? How many times?
Yeah, just the one. Just the one. I did a lot of things just one time, Ed. Not just so I could say it, but because of what we're talking about here, just so I knew what it was like.
Now, what about here? It says in your description on Amazon, because you can find all of Jason Horsley's book on Amazon.com. He had...
Amazon, though. I wish people wouldn't use it.
Okay.
So evil, yeah.
I hear you. Landmademan.com, we get them
there? No, but just going straight to the publishers, really. Aeon is my current publisher. Yeah.
He had an end times community in Taos.
That was the beginning of the end for me, because that was the period right before the bottom fell out and I threw away all my money. That was kind of how I threw it away, because I just bought this property that I was going to mortgage just so I could wash my hands of it. So I bought the property and then fled to Morocco. And then while I was gone and no one knew where I was, the government seized the property because they thought it was a cult and whatever. I wasn't there to see what happened. But I was 30 years ahead of my time, because yeah, I thought the end was coming and we needed to get back to nature.
At the time, did you believe the end times were near?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe that from my early 20s on.
And what were you basing that on? Biblical prophecy or?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, the superficial answer is, again, I was influenced by certain products, like Alan Moore's Watchmen, Talking Heads Naked, the Starseed Transmissions, a book by Ken Carey. But it was a combination of things. You see, now I would say I just knew it, like a snake knows when an earthquake's coming, but I didn't know how to read those telluric messages. I didn't know how to read my body well enough. It felt so immense and so urgent that I just assumed, and looking at the state of society even back then, I just assumed it was coming really, really soon. Well, now, 30 years later, I'm mid-50s, I can say, well, I did cry wolf, but the wolf did show up, as it does. So now you can talk about the end times and people don't ask why you think that.
Well, that's interesting. Mid-50s, and you've decided to retreat to the farm.
Yeah.
And your plan is to write? My
plan is to get this functioning as a farm and as a community. I mean, it's not... The land is big enough for a community, but the house we live in isn't. But we can build, and there are ways and ways. So my hope, anyway, if not, it is a plan, but also on a wing and a prayer plan, is to get something up and running in the next 5 years, before our money runs out, that people can come to as a community, as a retreat centre, depending on what kind of state the world is, or as a permanent place for refugees.
Well, I sent you my photograph on Twitter. If I come knocking on your door, I hope I'm welcome to come in.
That was an old photo, though.
Well, I still look the same, believe it or not. I don't look about 30 pounds heavier, but the face is about the same. How would you describe, Jason Horsley, how would you describe your politics?
Oh, I wouldn't. I wouldn't. I kind of like the question, though, but would it be disingenuous to say I don't have politics? But the reason, I'll tell you why anyway, is that I've always been paranoid. I've always believed that there was no such thing as a good politician, no such thing as a good political system, and that behind all of those things were forces of darkness. It's weird. Well, it's not weird. I've always believed that because I was born into a family that was involved in that, so I must have known it from a young age. But I didn't remember that in my 20s. So I didn't quite know. Why am I so paranoid? Like, as soon as I heard about Mae Brussell, heard what she was saying, I'm like, I'm down with it. This has got to be true. As soon as I heard about satanic ritual abuse, that's definitely true. I never had any trouble. You could say I was gullible, but I've been quite rigorous in terms of researching stuff. So it's not gullibility, it's something else. It's just like this felt sense that behind all the political systems there are forces of control that are anti-human and anti-life. So what? That doesn't really leave me with a political opinion, unless you think that's a political opinion.
And you describe paranoia. Is it paranoia or more cynicism?
Well, I like cynicism in the Greek sense, the cynics, and I do try to practice that, which is just really rigorous skepticism. I use paranoia in the non-clinical sense in terms of paranoid awareness, really, but the awareness of dark forces that are manipulating us. That it looks like paranoia to other people, so I call it that because it's shorthand. But I don't think it's cynicism, though, in the common sense, because I've never been cynical about life, right? I've been very skeptical and even condemnatory. Well, I've tried not to be condemnatory, but really scathing about celebrities and political systems and culture and all that. There are things I enjoy, of course, but when it comes to, and even human beings to a certain degree, or humanity, but when it comes to life itself, weirdly, I've always been very optimistic and very positive, and I would say that has to do with a deep faith in the divine and the presence of the divine, which